Hello, last Friday I went to see Superman vs. Batman. Everything about it was ridiculous. It's got a title and a marketing campaign that smells like professional wrestling, but its actors and writers seem to think they're making an opera. The reviews are pretty bad, and it's hard to see how most people would enjoy it. But that's the thing. This movie, weirdly, wasn't made for you. It was made for me. And that's why I will be able to tell you the worst thing about Superman vs. Batman. Before I was a world politics and history nerd, I was a comic book nerd. The fact that one of the most expensive films ever made was produced with me in mind is a bit mystifying. Most superhero films, and sadly most movies Hollywood makes, are geared towards adolescent boys, or those with a similar mindset. That describes me pretty well, but this movie isn't really geared towards teenagers. I would argue that to truly enjoy Superman vs. Batman, you need to have been immersed in comic books for at least 3 decades. As a 36-year-old man, I'm probably on the young end of the demographic this film was produced for. This is about to get super nerdy, but we need to go this way to explain the movie's central problem. The joy of this film, for people like me, is the way that it mixes and matches decades of published stories. Reviewers have rightly pointed out that the movie never really gels into a coherent vision. Even by the loose standards of superhero stories, the plot doesn't make much sense. But for the couple tens of thousands of comic book nerds this movie was made for, that's really not all that important. Batman and Superman stories have been published for almost a human lifetime at this point. Some of the elements of this film date back to the 1930s. The villains, Lex Luthor and Doomsday, date back to the early 1940s and the early 1990s, respectively. One of the movie's most pleasant surprises is the way that it incorporates the work of Jack Kirby from the 1970s. In a gloriously batshit sequence in the middle of the movie, Batman has a vision of the future that clearly hints at the presence of Darkseid, a supremely weird bad guy from the pop art era. This gray-faced genocidal elder god from the planet Apocalypse is not to be confused with the blue-faced genocidal elder god named Apocalypse that we'll be seeing in the X-Men franchise this summer, or the purple-faced genocidal elder god that the Marvel Comics franchise has been hinting at since the Avengers movie. Intellectual property concerns aside, the idea that Jack Kirby's trippiest, most cosmically insane works may be about to be committed to a big-budget film is super exciting. More patient critics than me can probably point to the way that almost every scene of the film calls back to one comic book era or another. There is one era and one creator, however, that has much more influence than anybody else over these proceedings, and that's Frank Miller. His later work has been tremendously influential. He's the guy behind the Sin City and 300 franchises. What's less appreciated is how much he has shaped the cultural footprint of more mainstream superheroes. Netflix's Daredevil is about 95% Frank Miller. Every Batman movie, from Tim Burton to today, owes a ton to Miller. This one most of all. In the 1980s, Frank Miller published 2 tremendously influential 4-issue series, The Dark Knight Returns in 1986 and Batman Year One in 1987. These 360 pages of comic book have yielded billions of dollars in box office returns. Extended sequences from Superman vs. Batman are lifted directly from these comic books. Superman as God, the pearls falling from Batman's murdered mom, the Superman-Batman fight that the entire movie builds to, and the grim old fascist Batman are all Miller concepts as well. As someone who's been rereading these comic books for a quarter century, seeing these sequences on film is thrilling, but it is also kinda troubling. This is where we go from comic book nerdery to some broader lessons. Frank Miller is a genius, but he's also from a very different time. His vision of these heroes is deeply rooted in the 1980s. Back then, US cities were falling into a nightmare of crime and drugs. We all lived with the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation. Miller's grim vision was so powerful because life in the 1980s really was quite grim. The Dark Knight concept is very much a part of the whole Dirty Harry, Death Wish era in popular culture. The idea that the world is messed up enough to require hyper-violent heroes makes for some compelling entertainment, but it's not particularly healthy. As this video probably makes clear, I may take comic book superheroes a little too seriously, but I really do think of them as our modern mythology. We've got almost 80 years of stories about these characters, put together by literally thousands of writers, artists, animators, actors, and filmmakers. Do we have to keep gravitating to one profoundly troubling vision laid out 30 years ago? Even if Batman vs. Superman is a complete flop, it's going to form what a generation of people think about these characters. We're not living in the 1980s anymore. There are a lot of people in politics and media who are invested in telling us that the world is going to hell. As I've pointed out elsewhere at great length, I think this is bullshit. As much as I enjoyed this film, I think it's very sad that one of the biggest movies of the year has such an unrelentingly grim worldview. That's the worst thing about Batman vs. Superman. It feeds into the narrative that the world is a terrible place and we need to do terrible things to stay safe. Frank Miller may believe this, but it's simply not true. If there are more movies in this franchise, I hope they move further towards the crazy optimism of Jack Kirby and away from Frank Miller. The next movie in this series is apparently based on the Suicide Squad, which leads me to believe I may be disappointed. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. And if you'd like to help me make more videos like this one, please click on the Patreon link here to find out how.